Get out the insurance cards, get out the copays. The office is open, my friends. Brought to you by drroto.com.
What is up and welcome in. We are the One and Done Show. We are your fast break of college basketball information. I am your host, Eric Romoff. You can catch me on those Twitter streets at FantasyNav, and he is the captain of our ship. He is fresh off another first place finish, although this time in the evening big jam. He is MC Holland34 on Twitter. He is Mr. Mike Holland. Mike, welcome in. How's that first place finish wearing on you today?
It feels good after the week that that I put down. I mean, it wasn't the best of weeks, but that's coming off of some wins in December. So it was great to get on the board there. I actually had a chance last night to hit the 5K, but just couldn't get that last piece in there on my two lineups. But I'm excited about today's slate. Another big one. We're just rounding out into conference form, right? So this one we've got tons of Big Ten matchups, Pac-12 matchups. There's a little bit of a sprinkle of some AAC with Wichita State and Memphis. So a lot of good games to talk about. Pricing is pretty solid. I'm excited. So, we'll see if I decide to jump into that qualifier for the Bonanza. I haven't decided yet.
Yeah, we've definitely got our eye on that top prize and making our way into the Bonanza. Big Jam today is featuring a 2K to first price tag, 10 games in total. Like Mike mentioned, a lot of action in the Pac-12 and in the Big Ten. Before we get going, Anthony G checking in. As always, gang. Let's go, fellas. Let's find those winners. Also got our guy Jason checking in. Definitely appreciate you guys swinging through. Hit those like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. And definitely keep that comment section going. Let us know if you have any questions along the way. We're going to go through our favorite games, our priority targets across this 10-game slate. Really starting off with one game that feels like the clear one to prioritize. This is one between the USC Trojans and the Arizona Wildcats. Ken Palm has this one with a score up over 150, 155 total according to those projections. Arizona is the favorite there, 81-74. So let's start off with the Trojans, 13-5 on the season. Pretty decent brand of basketball overall. 69th in offensive efficiency, 46th in defensive, about middle of the road in tempo. But this is the team that's getting paced up. So, Mike, what do you like for the Trojans?
Yeah, I like the pricing for the Trojans to start. Anytime you play Arizona, we're going to talk about them. Obviously, a ton. We've already talked about them a ton this year. And whoever they're going to play, we're going to talk about them a ton since they are 12th in tempo. And they just like to run up and down. I do like Drew Peterson, man, the headliner here for the Trojans. Him and Boogie Ellis are kind of the two-headed monster there. 8,200. I mean, there was points where Peterson was in the 9K range. The reason for the price increase is, he hasn't been great over the last 5 games. A 30, a 30, a 23, a 33, and a 28. That's okay, right, for maybe like a cash type line into those low 30s. But we really want to push 5X in these large field tournaments, and that's something that he has the ability to do. I mean, he's got a high usage rate. He can grab some boards for a big man or for a big guard. A really high assist rate. Can even block some shots. So, this is the type of environment while on the road, they're projected to score, 74 points. He's going to have to be a big part of that. So, how much of him I'm going to have is going to be a little bit tough because he's kind of in that weird range, right, where, you have your guys up at the top close to, 9 and 10K. And then there's always the solid, upper echelon mid-tier plays in that 7K range. So I don't know that a lot of people will go to him. One of my favorite things to do, what we've been doing all season long is, getting those guys like him, Kolick, Cam Jones is a prime example, Devin Carter, like these guys that are in pace-up spots that essentially can go for 40, right? And they're going to be lower owned. I don't really see him being over 10%, especially with the price tag. So I'm definitely going to be, putting him in some lineups. Like I've got 20 right now. I'll probably go 20 to 25%, try to be over the field on that. Where I'm not playing him, I'll be playing Boogie Ellis at 7,600. It feels like one of these guards is going to go off, right? Like to target the guards against Arizona. One of Arizona's weaknesses is they like to give up a lot of threes. So not necessarily in percentage, but their three-point rate. So their opponent three-point rate is 260th in the country. So giving up a lot of three-point opportunities, that's somewhere that Boogie can obviously rack up some points. He's got another high-usage player like Peterson, a little bit better of a shooter. Can also create a little bit lower of an assist rate, but he has the ability to rack up, 5-6 dimes. He's got a high steal rate. So He's someone that at 7,600 also has high 30 fantasy point upside. Don't think he's going to be super popular. Don't know that a lot of people are going to kind of go to this USC side. So they're the team that gets paced up, and we like to target, one or maybe two players in that type of environment for game stacks, or really just a one-off scenario. So those are my two priorities. Some of these other guys really for USC, maybe a sprinkle, maybe one out of 20. Kobe Johnson. I feel like every slate that USC's on, I will play one of him because at his price tag for someone that has a ceiling of 35 fantasy points, like I'm going to want to have access to that, right? That's 5X if he goes 33, 34 fantasy points. Now his path's a little bit tougher than someone like Ellis or Peterson, but he just kind of gets it done all over the place, right? He's really become involved over the last, I would say last 10 games or so. You would like the shot rate to be higher. He's really going to have to shoot well in order to, hit that ceiling. He's going to have to shoot probably over 60% from the floor and then do all the things that he does, like block shots, grab some steals, really high steal rate. He's also in the 20% assist rate. So he's someone for that large field. I'll probably throw 1 out of 20 in. Josh Morgan, the big man, he's kind of in that like large field area too, 1 out of 20, right? He has the ability to get into the 30s. His minutes are sometimes in question. His usage rate is like Kobe Johnson. It's not flashy. Their shot rates aren't great, right? Johnson's 15%, his shot rate's 16%, but he's an 11% block rate. So, the problem with playing a big man against Arizona is you got to deal with Tubelis and Ballo right on the other side. So that's why I prefer Johnson. I'll throw Morgan. He's going to have to try to stay on the floor if they're going to have any chance of keeping this game close. So I don't mind playing him. Now there are some young bigs for USC that they like to rotate in. So sometimes, he can play in the mid-20s. So that's something to kind of look for. But if you're looking for the large field, I wouldn't touch him in single entry or cash game. Really, that's more reserved for someone like a Boogie Ellis. And then if you want to, you can look at Reese Dixon-Waters. I mean, he has a shot rate and a usage rate in the low 20s and can get to the mid-20s. However, it takes a lot for him to get there, particularly shooting really well from the floor to get there. And he's just not like a primary option for this team. It really runs through Peterson and Ellis. So for me, if USC is going to get there, it's really going to come down to the top two guys that I talked about. And I'm probably just going to play one of them as I kind of go through and make the lineups. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to, especially with their price tags at 8,200 and 7,600. How much I'm going to be able to, put them together again, especially on the road at Arizona. But you do like the pace that Arizona provides for this, this peso spot for USC.
Yeah, definitely going to be hard to get Peterson and Ellis together. That is one of my common strategies that I deploy. Paying up in the stack is usually a pretty rare combination. But looking at some of these lower price guys, Kobe feels kind of tough, largely based on price tag, right? Like he's got a little bit of ceiling, but he's got to do. I mean, he'd have to have his best game of the year to pay off about 7K. So looking at Morgan, looking at Reese Dixon-Waters, I guess if you're trying to pay down in this game, obviously the matchup is more favorable to guard, so that would be kind of a tick in the column for Dixon-Waters. But with Morgan, if the argument against him is instability in minutes, and with how strong this front court is for Arizona, do you think that maybe kind of gives him a bit more of a stable minutes picture and in turn makes him kind of the pay down play there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind them. I like taking a shot. If this game stays close and it plays into the 70s or low 80s, and it's Drew Peterson and one of those two, I mean, you're going to be so far ahead of the field, right? And Morgan, I mean, yeah, he's going to need to be on the floor, man. And you can see when he's had games where he's played 30 minutes, right? Colorado, a really good, front court there with De Silva. Washington's got Mia and Brooks, right? Like another solid game in the 30s. So 5,900, and you're playing against how many teams are in the Big Jam? I think it's like 980 teams, right? Like you got to find ways to be different. So don't mind taking a shot. Obviously, there's not priority plays or by any means, right? But man, how many times have we been in situations where we're playing in these totals into the 150s and we just feel like some of these guys are not owned at all, which is kind of crazy. We get the popular plays, but it's like sometimes it comes down to like OMP from Marquette the other day, like 2 weeks ago when I won the Big Jam, won 2K. Like he was basically like 2% and went off for like 36 fantasy points. Not granted, he had a ceiling game, but that's just what sets you apart. Where Cam Jones and those guys don't quite have their ceiling game. So I'm going to take a shot at him. I'm not going to go bonkers. Like I said, maybe maybe two, probably one of each, just to kind of see if one of them can get there. Hopefully I get the pairing right with an Ellis or a Peterson if the game stays close.
That makes sense. For tonight's matchup, it is you and 941 of your closest college basketball friends that are facing off for that 2K. Probably a little bit less with people multi-entering. We will go to the other side of this matchup. That is the Arizona Wildcats, 15-3 on the year, off to a pretty strong start overall. Mentioned their pace, technically 12th in tempo in the country. Really strong on the offensive side, 7th there, 85th in terms of defensive efficiency. We've talked a lot about the strength of the front court. It kind of feels to me like the first question that you have to answer on tonight's slate is, which of these Arizona big men are you going to play? So, Mike, which of these Arizona big men are you going to play?
I got a follow-up question for you after this, and I think you know what it is. That price tag for Tubelis at 10-4 is it's climbing up there, man. But look, he's been so good, right? Like outside of the last game, before that, the 3 prior games, 43, 51, and 51. Like, I mean, that's Sheboy territory. So, I mean, there's not much that the guy doesn't do. He's one of the most athletic bigs in the country and just can do so many different things and makes this team absolutely dangerous. A threat for a double-double every night. Man, just going to get up a ton of shots, like really smart. Rarely gets into foul trouble. Can chip in on the defensive side. So it's tough. 10-4, scary number, where when you look at Ballo, right, like you're saving 2,200, it just feels like – and we've seen Ballo early in the year where he was just absolutely destroying people. He's come down to earth, right, over the past, 5 to 8 games or so. But he still has like high 30s, low 40s upside, and that's basically 5x at 8,200. So, still carrying monster rates there, high shot rate, high combined rebounding rate, 6% block rate. So I feel like obviously when people look at it, you put them together, right? Like the first instinct is to is to take Ballo. But the price tag should hopefully take some of that ownership off of Tubelis. And I never play them together, but I know you, my friend, kind of like our guys from Marquette, Lewis and I forget who it was last year with Lewis. So you're playing both of them. Are you going to be paying almost $20K to get both of these guys in? Where you can see 2 games ago, one went for 43, the other one went for 39. I don't know if that's even enough at 18.6. Is that what it is? Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on the two of them?
Yeah, the price tag makes it tricky, right? I was just mentioning on the USC side that paying up for the 2 highest priced options in a stack is a really good way to get different, and that holds true, right? There probably won't be but a small handful of other people that are going to take that approach. If you're going to be mass entering this one, right, 15, 20 builds or so, I think it's fair to take a shot or two, but they both really have to have their ceiling games in order to pay off almost 19K in price tag, right? And the nature of the way that these Wildcats deploy these 2 pieces, one of them having their ceiling game is going to take away from the other, right? So if we were talking, just $1,000 less, $1,200 less, I think it'd be a more viable play. But if I'm going to throw more than a dozen builds in there, let's say, I'll have at least one where these 2 are pairing.
Yeah, and I was thinking Marquette, but it was actually Creighton when you were playing the Ryans, and they were like,
right.
Up there in the 8 and 9Ks, and you would just drop like 90 fantasy points between them. So, yeah, I mean, if I had to pick between the 2 right now, I'm leaning Ballo just to give me the savings, right? Like 10-4, that's over 20% of your build. That's really tough if he doesn't get into really I mean, even if I'm playing against him and I see him go for 42, like I'm actually okay with that on such a large slate. So unless he's going to tick up into the high 40s or even that 50 spot again, which he can do absolutely, then that's what's scary. The rest of this team, it really comes down to the 3 guards. It's Kriisa, Larson, Ramey. Of the 3 of them, for me, it's Ramey because of the price tag. 1, the minutes are way up for that type of price tag, and he's been good over the last couple of games. So 26 and the 33 fantasy point output, and he can. We've seen him play at Texas. We know what he can do. He can get hot from 3. Really good on the defensive side, and create 19% assist rate. So Ramey is someone that I'm definitely looking at, especially if you're paying up for Tubelis, right? Like and you want to go 2-1 in this game, feels like the Tubelis-Ramey combination. Obviously, feels a little bit better. Get two of the premier guys there. You could also pay up a little bit more, 400 more for Larson. He's 6K. He's just so volatile, though. That's not to say Ramey's not volatile, right? Like sometimes we'll see Boswell come off the bench and kind of usurp some of the minutes from Ramey or Larson. But at 6K, Larson, I'm probably cooling it. Maybe one. Kirk Risa, he's been good lately. That price tag, though, it just feels like that's his kind of his ceiling is 30 fantasy points, which is okay, right? Like it's not bad. But if I'm going to get 30 fantasy points and it's Ramey that gets it, I'm saving that. I'm saving that coin right there. So just mix and matching, these three with one of the two guys. I definitely want to be in a 2-1 scenario. I'm having a real tough time coming up with 3-1 or 2-2 just because the pricing is tough in this game, but it's the game you want to target, right? I mean, there's just so many fantasy points that are probably going to be available in this spot. When you look at the games outside of this, there's only, 3 games in the low 140s. There's one other game that's close to 150, which we'll talk about next, and the rest are in the 130s. So if this game goes off and gets into the 160, like you're going to need at least 3 pieces from this game.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way, and pricing makes it difficult 2 ways over, right? Like we talked about, Tubelis pushing north of 10K now, but also there are just a bunch of guys that are in that like annoying kind of mid to high 6K range, and it feels like this year DraftKings has really made it a point to price up guys that have like high 20s, low 30s ceilings in that mid 6K range. Like there's so many guys that just sit there where you wish they were just a couple $100 less expensive. Before we move on to our next showcase game, we see all of you tuning in on YouTube, on Facebook. Definitely let us know what you're thinking in the chat. Hit those like and subscribe buttons. And specifically the same question that I posed to Mike. Talking Tubelis, we're talking Ballo on the Arizona Wildcats side. If you're paying up for one of those big men, which way are you going? Our second showcase game, Mike teed it up perfectly. We are moving to the second highest total on the board. This one's coming in at 149, according to Ken Palm, implied total. It's the Indiana Hoosiers and the Illinois Fighting Illini. This one should be a little bit closer, 77-72 in favor of Illinois. So yet again, we will stick with the team that is the underdog to start. The Indiana Hoosiers are 11-6 on the season. Pretty solid overall, 29th offensively, 48th defensively, a little bit faster than average, 78th in tempo. So got some good pace to these Hoosiers. We have a potential pay up pivot off of Tubelis if you're not going that direction. So tell us about these Hoosiers, Mike.
Oh boy. 10-7 for TJD. Yeah. I don't know. I might leave that for someone else. I might leave it for you to do it. Man, 11K. Like we talked about when Shibwe, right, on last Saturday, got to 11K, but obviously that matchup was awful. Paying almost 11K, like, I mean, but the guy has gone into 52, 50, 68, and 3 of the last 5. Like, he's had to do more, obviously, even more than he already does, which is an insane amount, right? I mean, he's got Race Thompson out, Xavier Johnson's out. So, I mean, between him and Hood Schifino, there's not a lot going on for this Hoosier team, but I would expect Brad Underwood, and there's some athletic bigs for Illinois, right? Coleman Hawkins, Matthew Mayer's been playing really well lately. You got your boy Dane Danger that he's going to have to deal with. He's a real big body in there, but should have athletically the advantage over him. I just have a problem playing 10-7 for for anybody, especially on the road, right? For someone that doesn't really hit threes, now he can rack up the massive double-doubles, can block shots, right? 10% block rate. Look, I'm going to be playing the bigs from Arizona, and that's just kind of where I'm planting my flag, right? Like, and also there's a guy in the next game that is significantly cheaper that is probably going to be on the all Big Ten first team who absolutely smashed their opponent last time they played. So I'll probably look, like I say, I don't want to play him, but there's always that time when I get to like my 19th or 20th lineup and I'm like, who have I not played? And it's like a TJD, right? So maybe one of 20 for me, but I'll let someone else do that. I wouldn't say it's an awful play. I mean, we've seen what the guy's capable of. If I'm attacking anybody on this team, I really want to go low. With those injuries that we just talked about, like Trey Galloway, right? Like at 4K, I wish he was in the high 3K, but 4K, whatever. Basically been 5X the last 2 games, and he's gonna have to play a little bit more and do a little bit more, right? Like his season metrics aren't great, but obviously he is playing with Johnson and Race Thompson and those guys, but he's gonna have to do something. Like someone has to go with TJD, and it's usually Hood Shafino. They're the kind of the dynamic duo right now. But there's got to be a third piece if this game's going to stay close, and if they want to score 72 points, right? So Trey Galloway is someone that I'm looking at as a potential 4X punt, getting up to 5X. Miller Kopp, like someone else can do that. He's burned me a few times this year. I'm just not going to do it. He just needs to shoot threes. He needs the ball to literally find him in order to get there. I won't do it. Somebody will probably win the big jam playing him because I'm not. Tamar Bates, he's 4,400. I wish he did more. Like he's super talented, was a part of Texas recruiting class before Shaka left to Marquette, and now getting some opportunity at 4,400. He's just kind of there. More talented. I feel like maybe next year he's going to be a guy when we start to play like, at the beginning of the year that we're really going to want to get into. So, I think, burying the lead here, right? It's TJD, but then Jalen Hood Shafino, like people are probably cooled off on him a little bit. He was on that, that back-to-back 40 fantasy point output, and then was that like 3-4 games ago, and then the back-to-back like mid-high 20s. Usage rate really high, shot rate's really high, assist rate's 25%. He's going to play 35 minutes, 36, maybe 38 minutes tonight. If you're not playing TJD, right, it's probably a good opportunity for you to get to him if you can afford him at 7,500, which is where the plays from the earlier slate, like you talked about Josh Morgan, talked about Courtney Ramey. If one of those guys can get to 30 fantasy points and it allows you to get one of the Arizona bigs and Hood Shafino, you start to feel pretty good about building out your roster there. So 7,500, right? Like if anybody is capable of putting up 40, it's this guy right here. So I'll have some good shares of Hood Shafino. Jordan Geronimo, I'm not a believer yet, but I guess I have to maybe start paying a little more attention to this guy. Obviously filling in for Race Thompson. We all thought maybe Malik Renew, the freshman, would kind of be that guy, but it's really been Geronimo. And really getting it done on the defensive end, getting rebounds, man. A decent usage rate now, a couple of games in the 20s. He's okay. I think the price tag, obviously we're playing him at 3,900 and 4,100. Now it feels a little bit tougher to play him at 5K. It's always tougher to play the guy next to TJD when TJD can go for 60, right? So it just feels like that doesn't leave a lot of room for maybe a potential double-double at 5K, whereas, at 3,800, if you can sneak one out, it's a great play. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on kind of this Indiana side? Are you going to play some TJD since I'm almost completely off of them?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky, right? Like, overall, we're starting to see pricing get more and more tight, right? Edie now joins the 11K club with Oscar from this weekend, and these guys are getting closer and closer. So it's hard to get a good gauge of how much pricing is going to divert people's attention away from a player. If it's
like, what if I told you TJD was 12%? Or 15%?
I would probably want to come in at like 20 to 25%, right?
Yeah.
He's on the short list of players that can lead the slate in scoring, right? So like there's always going to be interest in that. But on the other side, if people aren't scared away from this price tag, Hood Shafino becomes such a clear play, right? I think Hood Shafino was prominently featured on some of your deep runs this year as well, right? So
yeah.
He's a guy that he does a lot in this offense. His pricing is getting a little bit trickier now that he's into the mid 7Ks, right? But ultimately, coming off of back-to-back games where everyone was hyped on him, everyone was willing to pay that price tag, and he came up flat. Even if you're not trying to create leverage off of TJD, I think that Hood Shafino is probably going to be a little bit under-owned tonight. So those are definitely the two that jump off the page for me, right? I want to get into this game. I just don't know if this Indiana side is where I can, potentially stack, and certainly not find any salary relief, right? Because their punt plays are still relatively expensive overall. So that's kind of my take on it. Moving over to the Illinois side, so these Illini come in 13-5 on the season, also looking really strong. 40th on the offensive side, 25th on the defensive side, pacing it up pretty well overall, 59th in tempo. So definitely should be a run and gun, fast paced type of game for the Illini. Who are the names that are jumping off the page for you?
So we just laid it out with Hood Schifino. Terrence Shannon Jr. is in absolutely the exact same spot, where blowing it up 55 and a 42 3 and 4 games ago, and then the last 2 games of 22 and a 27. Same thing, right? Like it feels like I would be willing if there was a price pick where it was like one of these two goes for 4.5x or better. I would take the bet that one of those two would do it, because I mean, how often do you get guys that hopefully this should draw down the ownership. He's at home. He's 8,500 now, because obviously those 2 games where he put up the 55 are now being, accounted for. We know we got burned at 9,300. I don't think he was that popular on that slate, so you get a little bit of a haircut. But he's still more expensive than kind of where he's been for most of the year, which has kind of been in like that mid 7K range. So yeah, I mean, he does everything. We talked about, how much more he has to do now that Sky Clark left the program, right? Now you got some other guys like Jaden Epps and Sincere Harris having to kind of step up, but they're really only playing 20 minutes a game. This Illinois team is kind of annoying. They're not stackable by any means, I don't believe. I'm really only playing Shannon and Matthew Mayer, who, has just been a dog recently. Like, has to step up, like him and Shannon with the 2 Big 12 transfers. Mayer, I don't know, like we talk about this all the time. I don't know why he's guard eligible, but whatever, right? Like he's basically been 40 the last couple of games, shoots the 3 ball, 6% block rate this year, a 10% assist rate for him too. Like he's kind of on a heater right now, and the price is only ticking up a little bit. So for 7,700, these guys are one-offs for me. I don't want to play them together. The rest of this team, like if someone wants to play Jaden Epps at 5,500 or Sincere Harris at 4,100, by all means, go for it. It's a little mucky with Coleman Hawkins kind of being like, everybody thought he was going to be a star at the beginning of the year, had some great games. Now Hawkins is 6,800 and had a 9-piece last game. He's just really been into the 20s, right? Really haven't seen him shine recently, and doesn't feel like there's a ton of upside to him right now. Now we know he could break out because his rates are consistently in like the, the low 20s, pretty much in everything. So you could play him as maybe a leverage play, because no one's probably going to play him right now, just with the way that he has been playing, especially when you could pay up $900 for Mayer and then, or, choose someone like Shannon if you're trying to get away from some of those Arizona bigs and want to play a guard at that price point. My strategy all year has been to play high-price forwards, right? Because they're the guys who can get the monster double-doubles, block shots. The guards, man, like when they go off, they have to kind of everything seemingly has to go right on their end as far as shot making, which is something that Shannon can do. But for Coleman Hawkins, like he's more talented than what he's shown, but he's just falling down the pecking order of kind of this offense right now. It's really going through Shannon and Mayer. And then your boy, Dane Danger, who is another interesting case, right? Like, I don't know what to do with this guy. Like, the early this year, we saw his ridiculous double-double when it was when he was like, 3,900 or whatever. And like, we were like, who's this guy? Like, we knew he transferred over from Baylor. It was absolutely ridiculous. Now I've been playing stiffer competition, and it hasn't been pretty. The teams that he's kind of gone off on have been, lower mid-majors. Had the good game against Michigan State, right? But for basically, what is he, 7K or 7,300? I don't know. It's probably not for me, but he does have some ceiling to him where I feel like it's better than going down to one of these guards like Epps and Harris, where you're just going to kind of get 4X. I don't know. Like, what are you doing with this Illinois team? This game just seems a little unstackable to me. Maybe it's because of the first game and the next game we're going to talk about, but I don't know. This seems like a one-off type of environment.
Yeah, the game fits in kind of weird, right? Because like there's so many things to like in the first game that we covered. There are plenty of things to like in our third showcase game. Spoiler alert. There's also more favorable pricing in that one. So it does feel like it's hard to make this a game that you have a ton of exposure to in any single lineup. But I do think this is a game that you'll have a lot of exposure to over the course of your entire player pool, if that makes sense, right? The thing for me with Danger, we talk about Matthew Mayer, having the random dual eligibility. I don't know why DK continues to get this wrong on so many players, but will take it for as long as they do. That always seems to drive rostership up, right? So I expect him to be popular as well. And also for Danger specifically, not only are you getting the leverage off of Mayer, I kind of wonder with Hood Schifino, with TJD on the other side, with Geronimo, even if we don't see more minutes for Danger in tonight's matchup, right? Those big games, yes, they've come against, kind of lower caliber opponents overall, but they've also come in points where he's getting significantly more minutes, right? So if stylistically this is a game where Danger can see just a few more minutes out there on the court, he's the type of player that can definitely take advantage of it. So he'll be in the pool for me, but it's hard to get to, more than one piece on either side of this game for me.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you were going 2-1 in this one, it would probably be on that Indiana side and just taking a shot to see if maybe Galloway or Bates or Kopp could knock down some shots. It feels like if one of those three, if one of those can hit 2 3-pointers and actually be involved in the offense, then one of those three guys could go with a Hood Schifino or a TJD, and then you can run it back with a Mayer or Shannon, and then just hope that this Arizona game doesn't go bonkers right on the other side. So that's my biggest problem. But that's leverage, man. Like that's leverage. If the USC game goes under, man, Arizona just they're just so fast. It's tough to see that happening. But 900 and something teams, right? Like take a stance. It's not saying that you can't play anybody from that Arizona USC side. You could obviously play a cheap guy and an expensive guy and still be okay playing a 2-1 in this matchup. So there's ways to get there, and that's why we talk about it, and that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, that's definitely the way that I would go if I was stacking as well. It's just those three guys, Bates, Kopp, Galloway, they should all be like high 3K guys, and instead they're all low to mid 4K guys, right? So not a lot of people are going to click the button, which I think is kind of the point that you're getting to, and finding creative ways to get into these priority games is the name of the game here. It's how you separate yourself and ladder up in these large tournaments. Our third game that we want to profile, Michigan Wolverines at Maryland Terrapins. KenPom is projecting 143 points for this one. Close matchup in favor of Maryland, 73-70. Yet again, we will start with the underdogs here, the Michigan Wolverines, kind of stumbling out the gates, 10-7 on the season. Looking okay in terms of their efficiencies, 38th on the offensive side, 84th on the defensive side. A little bit faster than average pace, 107th in tempo. So obviously it starts with Hunter Dickinson. This is a player that not that long ago was always pushing to be one of the highest priced guys on the slate, now getting a bit of a haircut. What are your thoughts on maybe going that way if you're looking to get off of the expensive forwards?
Yeah, I mean, goodness, okay, he's 8,700, which is 2K cheaper than TJD, which is almost 2K cheaper than Tibellis. And he just went for 35 points and 12 rebounds at home against this same team because this is a smaller Maryland team. I'm having a real hard time here, man. But you know what's going to happen. He's going to get 2 fouls in the first 6 minutes of this game. I expect it to be popular. I mean, Michigan beat the brakes off of them, 81-46. Now they're 3-point dogs on the road. I don't know who's going to stop. I don't know who guards him. Like RIP to Reese and Scott. And it's yeah. I mean, outside of that game, I mean, he's been 40 and 37 over the last 2 games. I mean, he's always someone that profiles in the high 30s, low 40s, right? So that 8,700, that feels like an easy button to click. I'm going to have a lot of them. I don't know if I'm going to say 50%, but man, it's probably creeping towards closer to 35 to 40% Hunter Dickinson. Because you can play Dickinson with another one of those bigs. You'll just have to get one of those pieces that we talk about in the low, the high 5K or the low 4K Indiana guy to make it work. Everybody else in this game, kind of one off, maybe 1 out of 20. Jett Howard, we know that he can go off. It's just he's got to make his shots. Now at 7,400, he's gone for 32 and 40 the last couple of games. You like the shot rate. You like the fact that he can get some block shots. He's a decent in assists. So, there's a path for him to get back into the 30s in this game. Last time against him, I believe it was a 23 that he had. So, but obviously when Dickinson's going for a million fantasy points, it's tough for anyone else to kind of get in there. So, he's actually a solid leverage play off of Dickinson, even though they're not the same position. But as far as this team. I would almost rather go to Buffkin and Doug McDaniel because there are guys that can get into the low 30s for a much cheaper price point, like Buffkin at 6,700. And we loved him when we were playing him at 3K and 3.8 and 4.5. Finally reaching that mid 6 mark here. But he's a guy that can fill it up in a bunch of different categories: 2% block rate, 2% steal rate, decent usage rate, 18% assist rate, 21% shot rate. So he's got to do a lot of everything to make it work. So maybe a share or two of him. Doug McDaniel, I'm coming off a pretty nice game, almost 5x, basically 5x what his price tag is. Does need a lot of things to go right for him. Really taking advantage of obviously Jalen Llewellyn's injury, now playing piles and piles of minutes. But you like the shot rate, and he hasn't shot great. So like there's probably some room for a little bit more, right? If he does shoot well. Now this is a road environment, which is why I trust Dickinson more than I trust any of these other guys because of matchup, and two, because he's been in big games. I'm not saying they haven't been in big games this year, but these are younger players that we're talking about. So I just can't get over Dickinson and what he did to them last time. And I just don't know how they're going to stop him other than him getting himself into foul trouble. So for me, it's more of just using a lot of Dickinson in that 35-40% range. And then just sprinkling in, Howard with a little bit more of Buffkin and McDaniel. Obviously not in the same lineup, but more pivots. I guess you could play McDaniel and Dickinson together. It's just tough to not stack that first game. And if you're not stacking the first game, you're passing on some guys that are in the 40 fantasy point range for that second game that we talked about. So you're looking for super leverage here if you're trying to stack this game, I guess. And that's what it looks like for most of the games, unless you catch an overtime in this one. So I just don't know. I don't know. I guess analytically, whatever, KenPom, they know what they're talking about 90% of the time. So I guess they're going to be able to try to stop them this time. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Dickinson and what you're going to do with them?
Yeah, to your prior point about KenPom, that was kind of a head scratcher, right? This is a 3-point spread for a team that almost got doubled up when they played like 2 weeks ago, right? So should be a little bit closer. Initially, I had a similar thought, right? Like, I love finding ways to get my guy Dougie McBuckets in there. But he's really scoring dependent, right? So if we're kind of following the line that Dickinson has another monster game, I don't think that he pairs too well with McDaniel. I mean, just look to the last game when they played on New Year's Day, right? Of the 3 other guys that you mentioned, McDaniel easily had the worst game out of the 3 because he needs to score those points, and those were all going Dickinson's way, right? If you talk about Buffkin, gets it done in a lot of different ways, still put up 21 points, not what you wanted, 6.7K, but chipped in some boards, chipped in some assists, stole the ball 3 times. And similar story with Jet Howard, right? I think it was 6, 6, and 5 in that game against Maryland on the first. Yeah, 6, 6, and 5. So these are guys that.
What about this? Let me ask you this: you think Maryland's just going to it has to be an auto double, triple team? Like there could be some leverage here if Maryland Kevin Willard decides to we got destroyed by Dickinson, make someone else beat us at home. That's what kind of scares me, and to why I want to get closer to 25%.
So I think that makes sense, right? Like especially you're looking at a team that's 11-6 on the year, right? Like they've got a little bit of latitude in terms of how they approach the game. So I could certainly see a world where the coach says, not this time. It's going to be anyone but Dickinson. But it's a fair question. Like looking over at the Maryland side, whether or not they've got the guys to do it, right? The Terrapins, like I mentioned, 11-6 on the season, 66 in offensive efficiency, a little bit better defensively, 40th overall, middle of the road in tempo. But ultimately, do they have someone on their side of the roster that can slow down Dickinson, even in the context of a double team, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's ugly out there. Reese and Scott going to have their hands full again. But I think there's going to
be in the office for those boys.
Oh yeah, I think you're going to have to auto double. It's going to have to be one of those guards, maybe Hakeem Hart, whoever. The thing is, that's what sets up McDaniel and Buffkin to get these shots, right? These 3-pointers, but it raises Dickinson's assist level. We saw this with Edey the other day playing Minnesota. He had 3 fantasy points in the first 12 minutes of the game. And there was an adjustment where they started feeding him instead of from the wing, they started feeding him from the top. And there's just adjustments that you can make to counteract kind of double teams, and he was racking up assists. So like we know Dickinson's a great passer, like so that it can almost offset, right? But it feels like the ceiling would be capped if they decide to do that, which is a little scary, which is why I want to one off some of these other guys without Dickinson. But with Maryland, the pricing on Maryland's kind of interesting for a team that's projected to score 73 points. I mean, Jameer Young's been really, really good. Kind of getting into the low 30s, has some ceilings in the 40s. But that price tag's starting to get closer to where I'm like, I don't know if I can have more than maybe like 2 shares. Scott at 6,700, feels like he's pretty interesting. He's a guy that could get into 30, but just so up and down, right? He's a large field play. Hakeem Hart, like all these guys on Maryland side are definitely large field type plays. Hakeem Hart at 6K. It's okay. I'm not in love with it, right? Like, could he do something? Like, you just like his rates to be higher. He's on the floor a ton. I think about making anybody a priority, maybe playing a few youngs and then looking at somebody like Scott. He's a guy that typically is in the low sevens, mid sevens. Getting him at 6,700 in a home matchup, it feels okay to play him, especially coming off a 31 fantasy point output. I could see playing him. I'm more in love with the Michigan one-offs, right, than I am this Maryland side. But 73 points, man, that's how did they get there? It's probably going to be Young and Scott. So those are probably the guys that I'm going to go to. These other guys in the low 5Ks like Carey, Martinez just doesn't play enough minutes as a value play. I'd rather play these other values from Indiana who play in the high 20s, mid 20s.
Yeah, and heads up on Scott, it sounds like he is dealing with an illness ahead of tonight's game. Sounds like his minutes might be in question. So definitely we'll need to keep that in mind. Get into our Discord, follow us at Get Green Screens on Twitter. We'll be posting out any updates if they become available really anytime before lock. It might be a minute or two, but something to keep in mind with Dante Scott. Sounds like his minutes are in question. I guess kind of any closing thoughts on either how these two matchups line up, if there's any particular weaknesses from one side or the other that maybe gives a player out of these two games an edge.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Maryland, like surprisingly enough, it's probably doesn't matter because Dickinson destroyed them last game. But I mean, Michigan's not great on the offensive rebounding side, so there's some easy putbacks, which is why Scott and Reese are somewhat interesting, especially at home. We know the swing, we know they got the breaks beaten off of them, but I wouldn't be surprised if Maryland won this game by 10 points. That's just the way college basketball is. But yeah, for me, I'm just more enamored with the one-off side on Michigan and looking at Young, and if Scott's good to go, now I'm a little hesitant at 6,700 to play him. It makes me like Reese more if he's out. I don't know. I don't know if I want to punt even if Scott's out, because the last time this thing happened, it just blew up in our face, and they got beat down. So yeah, we just got to be careful on that. But potentially some pieces will pop up depending on what happens with the starting lineup. Which who knows if we'll get it before lock? We'll see.
Yeah, very legitimate question as to whether or not we'll get any news before tip off. This is the life that we lead in college basketball. Before we round out the rest of our player pool, those of you that are checking in on YouTube, show us a little love, hit those like and subscribe buttons, and let us know in the comment section if you have any questions. Mike, my question for you, mentioned that there are 10 games on this board, so pretty deep player pool overall. We've talked a lot about some of the most expensive players being in our showcase games. Elsewhere in this high tier, what are some of the other pay-up options that are catching your eye?
Yeah, got Zach Edey, obviously 11-1. Like, what are we doing here? It's like a supermarket, right? Like, it's like 11K would have been fine. Like, we're going to 11-1 now. So, oh my God, this matchup is so juicy, but they're probably going to destroy these guys. 11-1, like, I don't know what to do with that, man. Like, Are you doing this? He's been 58 and 57 in 2 of the last 3 games, and now he gets a prime matchup. I guess you're going there. But you're gonna have to sacrifice Dickinson and or one of the bigs from Arizona if you do it. Are you going there?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Like he's been playing well enough to pay off this price tag, right? So I don't think that it's an unreasonable number, but in the context of what it costs you, it's going to be hard to get there. And we'll talk about this as we round out the player pool, but I mean, I don't see a ton of near min price value that makes it possible to get Edie and really into any of the other games that we want to, at least in the way that we would choose, right? So
Yeah, for sure.
in a vacuum, I think it's a fine price, but ultimately it really restricts with what you do with the rest of your roster.
But you have to have them, and if you
Sprinkle them in, right?
Yeah, sprinkle them in and single
I said it with TJD. It's a short list of guys that can lead the slate in scoring, and he's well implanted on that list.
Yeah, exactly. You can look at Kendrick Davis. I don't love the matchup against Wichita State, but he's someone that's been balling out. Whatever, right? Like, to me, it's like he's more expensive than guys like Shannon and Hitchafino. It's like, why don't I just save the coin? Probably 1 out of 20. Keanu Brooks Jr. Why can't he be mid-7? If he was not 8,300, I'd like him a little bit more. Coming off a couple of 43s. We know he's just going to play a ton of minutes. We know he's going to grab rebounds. We know he's a challenge for a double-double. We know he has defensive metrics, that can help pay this price off. I don't know how much I'm going to have of him. You also look at Jalen Clark from UCLA. Jaime Jaquez too, but I like Clark more. This is a tough UCLA team, and Arizona State's pretty decent on the defensive side. So this game's a little scary, but Jalen Clark's also someone that's a really good rebounder and has shown high 30, 40 fantasy point upside, which is 5x at his price. Probably not going to be a lot of people playing him. So I'll have a share, maybe 2, because I do like him personally. One of my favorite players in college basketball. Craig Porter Jr., he's going to play probably 40 minutes tonight, which is the entire game. Memphis is pacing up Wichita State. Now, interesting enough, Wichita State's kind of shrunk their rotation a little bit the last game, which makes this kind of enticing to the other guys who are in the mid-tier here. But, Porter, like another guy, 7,900, which he was a little bit cheaper, but the pricing's good on this slate, man. They're going to, DK's making us make some decisions here. High 30s, okay, right? I want him to get to 40 in a tournament, though. So he's in the player pool, right? So that's really all I got. Any of those guys kind of jumping out to you?
Yeah, it's the last one that you mentioned with Craig Porter, and it's something that doesn't immediately jump off the page, but with what Wichita State's done with their rotations, you look over his last 3 games, 40, 36, and 40 minutes, right? Obviously, the fantasy production hasn't been quite where you want it to pay off an 8K price tag, but if he's going to be out there the entire game and they're getting paced up, definitely feels like an interesting name to underline and mix into your rotation. The mid-tier, especially on a slate where pricing is as tight as it looks to be for tonight, is always going to be make or break. So who are some of the guys that you're going to be mixing in around the priorities and the stacks that we already covered?
Yeah, let's slide over back to Wichita State. We'll talk about Kenny Poto and James Rojas, the forwards. Man, if they're going to be playing in the low 30s, mid-30s for Poto, he's back-to-back 36 and 39 fantasy points. Rojas coming off of 37 at 24 before that. These guys were low, high teens, low 20s before they really got this minutes increase. Rojas, I liked him since he was at Alabama. We were trying to jam him in a few years ago at 3,800 as like the starting center, and then Oates would just take him out. But minutes, man, like minutes in a pace up, like love to see it, right? So where you're not playing Porter, Wichita State feels like a fantastic one-up spot or a one-off spot, or even a one-up on your opponent that you're playing tonight. Could you go 2-1 with Porter and one of those guys? Absolutely. Would you probably want to run it back with either a DeAndre Williams or a Kendrick Davis? Probably, and then pray that those other games just don't go bonkers. But that many minutes, like we are really intrigued by these guys, obviously. So, if they're going to play minutes into the 30s at those price tags, they can both challenge for double doubles. So, either one of those guys, you might be playing. He's just trying to save the salary with. I think Rojas is just a tad cheaper than Poto.
Yeah, I would lean on the Rojas side. He's coming in $400 less expensive than Poto. I think both are fine. The real conundrum is what you mentioned, that if you're going to go with more than one of these players, you really need to lean into the stack and just hope that it either hits overtime, help the other games come into the under, and that's really hard to do on a slate like this. There are some juicy games that I don't want to leave on the side, so I'll mix them in here and there, but really more as kind of last guy in pieces from this game in particular.
Yeah, for sure. And then, you could talk about 1,000 guys in the mid tier. So, we'll just name off some names. Like Campbell, he's always in play. We thought he'd have a little bit better of a year, but man, Clark and Hawkes have just been the 1A and 1B basically. But there's a chance for him to go into the high 30s. It's a tougher matchup at Arizona State, but he's a veteran, so we know that that's not going to steer him off. If you got a 35 at 5X, like we'd love it. Tristan Da Silva, someone that I really like. He's 7,100. Someone has slate smashing ability. Maybe I like him a lot more because he was on one of my 3 big jam main slate wins. But anytime you can get somebody that has 40 fantasy point upside at 7,100, you're going to want to take some shots. Fletcher Lawyer, I mean, Purdue's going to beat down Minnesota, and he's been playing very well lately. Basically been over 4X in the last couple of games. So you can look at Lawyer. Wish his price was kind of in that mid 5K, but paying up a little bit for him. Harrison Ingram, he's 6,200 from Stanford. They're playing Oregon State. Man, talk about boom bust play. That's exactly what it is. Like I'll try to fit him in one lineup right in case he goes for boom, which he did last game for 36 fantasy points. And then Noah Williams, kind of like the border, he's playing piles and piles of, not quite 40, but piles and piles of minutes and producing, right? 30 fantasy points last game, 31 the previous game at 5,600. You really like that. Now they're on the road at Colorado, but Noah transferred from Washington State, is a veteran player. So it's definitely someone that I'm looking at. Any of those guys kind of stick out to you? Maybe a Campbell or Da Silva or even a Noah at that minutes allotment he's getting and production he's putting out?
Yeah, I think Da Silva, you correctly characterize him, right? Like this is a play that if it hits, he's probably going to be in the single digits of ownership and can absolutely vault you up the pay scale. Noah Williams is interesting, right? Whether or not he's got enough ceiling to be super exciting, I think is a valid question. But just in terms of pure points per dollar, he looks like a really solid play. He comes in under the starting per player average, right? So someone that you can get in and kind of ratchet up a little bit. Don't have to punt all the way, but still get some decent salary savings on interest. So those are really the 2 names that jump out for me. Like I talked about earlier, we're going to need some salary relief in a big way to do the things that we want to do on this slate. So what are some of the guys that you're looking at save a few bucks?
Just don't tell me that Scott's going to be out and then Noah Bachelor at 3K becomes available. I don't want to do that again. Right. A couple of guys really stick out for me. Andre Jakimovsky from Washington State. I love this kid. Last year, I wish he would play, high 20s, low 30s, and yeah, he will deliver. He can shoot threes. Got 25 fantasy points last game, 4,100 playing at Utah. I'm going to take some shots at him. Corin Johnson, who finished second 2 weeks ago and didn't know that he wasn't playing. So I put up that 0 and finished second. And of course, the last 2 games, what has he done? 32 and 31 fantasy points at 3K. Yeah, do we have that game log where he's a 0 or it's not even on there? Because, he didn't play. That's what it was. Yeah, not even posted.
Didn't even happen.
That was fun. I think that was 2 days after I had gone back to back, and I was like, "Is this going to happen again?" So I will cautiously press his button, but no, probably no fear now, unless we get some news. But he's been good the last couple of games and really good on the fantasy production scale, right? 30 fantasy points. Probably going to want some of that action in there. Minnesota is kind of interesting. Carrington was just ruled out. Joshua Ola Joseph sounds like a somebody from Frozen. Jamison Battle, he's questionable, and Carrington was just ruled out. So we got some guys down potentially for Minnesota. We haven't talked a lot about the Minnesota guys. I mean, it's just a tough matchup against Purdue, right? Like Cooper and Garcia, you can pay up for. Garcia's been smashing, but I just don't know that I want to go to him. So Ola Joseph, I mean, if he's going to play 28 to 30 minutes, right, with some of these guys down, I don't mind it. 3,900, we're really scraping the barrel here. But Torres Samuels too, I think he's the one that benefits most for Carrington. Kind of being out, he's 3,700 at that guard position for Minnesota. So, he's been up and down, right? His minutes have been in the 30s and they've been in the teens. With Carrington kind of usurped his minutes last game by playing closer to 20. So if he gets those minutes back, at 3,700, he's someone interesting. So Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at right now, especially in a beatdown, right? Like it feels like Ola Joseph and Samuels will probably be a couple of guys that will probably still be out there towards the end of the game, maybe even a Henley. But I mean, we're just going to need to have maybe it seems like it happens every day. There's a couple of names like what was it last night? Justice Williams like played 31 minutes. He was less than 1% owned, 2 fouls in the first 2 minutes, and then he goes for like I believe 18 fantasy points, and you're 6x. And you're staring down and you're like, man, so the late news can open up so many things. I just hope it's not Scott.
Yeah. With regard to that late news, you mentioned Corin Johnson promptly featured with a big old snowflake on a second place lineup. Just speaks to the overall strength of that build. One thing to keep in mind, certainly put him in your utility spot, and where possible, try to keep $200 on the board. We've got Jakomowski also in that hammer window, $4,100 as opposed to $3,900. So just in case there's late news there, you've at least got a viable pivot as you're on that
utility
West
spots
Coast
need to be your late guys. Your late guys, man. Don't make the mistake.
Always.
I've done it a few times.
Yeah, and I'll do it too, right? I'll put the late guys in there, but then I won't be miserly with my salary, right? You got to make sure that if you're going to have a guy that's questionable or that has missed time before, you also have a pivot in mind that also starts late, right? So don't want to find yourself boxed in. Could have been a different night on what was already a pretty strong night overall if Corin Johnson was either playing or if you had a pivot like Jakomowski there at your disposal. Any kind of closing thoughts before we get out of here, Mike?
Yeah. It's always smart to attack that first game. Feels like it's gonna be real juicy. But if you're mass multi-entering, get some of those 2-1s and some of those games that we talked about below that, and then don't be afraid to follow on Twitter these teams. Like it's literally like 5 minutes before lock, you'll catch like someone out, and it can be game changing, man. Like we talked about Justice Williams last night, like sub 1%, getting someone 6x at basically garbage, the bare minimum. It can absolutely create all kinds of things into your lineup. So just pay attention to that, and we'll see what happens. I like the Wichita State guys. That spread's a little scary, plus 12 on KenPom, but it's a pace-up spot, so we'll kind of see what happens with that. But I'm excited. We get a bunch of lineups in. Maybe we can ship another one, and maybe we can get you on the board.
Yeah, managed to post one on the board early in the season. I know that our guy Corey took down a tournament last night. Like I mentioned off the top, Mike shipped down the late big jam. We got our guy Jay Heinrich checking in. Let's get that bread.
Hey, I think he's going to be on with us on Saturday slate, huh?
He'll be here covering the Saturday slate. He's eyeing his first victory of the year as well. Mike mentioned a few times now just how critical it is to get late breaking news. One of the best ways to do that, get over to drroto.com, get yourself subscribed. Not only do you get access to all of Mike's written work over there, but you also get into our members-only Discord. We are in there talking about these plays, talking through last guys in, who we want to stack, where we want to get some salary relief, but we're also sharing that news as it comes available. So get to drroto.com, get yourself subscribed, get into that Discord. Let's get this bread.
Thanks for stopping by the office. Get your fantasy prescription by subscribing to the channel and checking out drroto.com. And until the next visit, be well and take care.